Okay, hi guys. We are going to be making buttermilk biscuits today. So as you can see, we have everything already measured out here, like we taught you with the chocolate chip cookies. This is the sifted flour. We have baking soda, baking powder, salt, cold butter, and buttermilk. We've got a whisk, a wooden spoon, these different size biscuit cutters, and then this is called a pastry cutter. It's gonna go in and get that butter mixed up with the dry ingredients. And then we have a rolling pin and some extra flour for when we're rolling out the dough. And then of course the gloves that we're gonna start using. So the first thing that our recipe is asking us to do is to preheat the oven to 375. We already have that going. And then we're gonna mix the dry ingredients together. So I already have the big bowl with the flour in it. So then I'm gonna add the baking soda, and then the baking powder, and the salt. And what I like to do with this is use a whisk to get it really mixed around so that you don't see the separation of the baking soda, the salt, and the baking powder. It all looks like one thing finally together. And then I'm going to take the half cup of butter. I split it into two sections. It was one stick of butter, which is a half cup. And then this is the pastry cutter that you'll take to kind of mix in the butter. And that's kind of what it looks like when it pops through. I don't know if you guys can see that. And you just continue doing that to kind of tap it to get it to come off of there. And my hands are kind of slippery. It's like slipping. And on your recipe, you'll notice that it says to continue doing that until it looks like coarse sand. So it's almost like that butter gathers up all of the pieces of the dry ingredients. It's not gonna look like a dough until you start kneading it. After you get the buttermilk mixed in there, it'll look kind of messy and crumbly. So this looks pretty good. To kind of scrape off some of that butter that could stick to your pastry cutter, which is good reason to have gloves on. A little bit more chunks that are getting down in there. So then here is the buttermilk, and for buttermilk we have 3/4 of a cup. So I'm just going to pour a little bit of it in there at a time and get that mixed up. An important thing to remember if you've had biscuits that the texture didn't feel very good when you were eating it, they weren't flaky, is that was probably due to some over mixing that occurred. So be careful not to do that. The rest of the buttermilk. And then the next step is to knead the dough, and I am going to hand it over to Miss Cox so she can show you how to take care of that.
Hi guys, so I'm going to help finish these biscuits and show you how to finish them up. So Miss Abbott mixed all of the ingredients together, and now I'm going to show you how to knead. So as you can see, this dough is pretty dry. That is what you want it to be. It's going to be a soft dough, which means that it's like the most dry type of quick bread. So in order to knead it, I'm going to get out my cutting board. I find that it's easier to keep your area clean if you have a cutting board rather than doing it directly on your countertop. It just makes cleanup easier because you can't take your countertop into the sink, but you can take your cutting board and set it in there so that you can wash it off. It makes it easier to sanitize too. So to knead, I'm gonna put a little bit of flour down. You don't want a whole bunch, you just want enough to like get the surface floured up. And then you wanna flour up your hands too, so sometimes I like rub my hands in it or sprinkle some over it. And then there are 3 steps to kneading. So the 3 steps are going to be fold, press, and quarter turn. And you can see this is really, really crumbly. That is okay. We didn't want to overmix because when you have flour, there's 2 different proteins in the flour called glutenin and gliadin. Those 2 proteins begin to join up with a liquid. And so the more you stir, the more that protein's able to join up and become gluten. And then it becomes more stiff, more structured, and we don't want that with our biscuits. We want soft, tender, flaky biscuits. The butter acts to help make it really flaky too. So to knead, I'm gonna do the fold, press, quarter turn. So I'm gonna kind of bring it together, and the first few times it won't really fold easily. It's gonna be more like crumbling, but as I do it, it'll come together because I'm developing that gluten as I do it. So fold, press, quarter turn, fold, press, quarter turn. You want to do this about 15 times until it starts coming together and forming like one solid mass. And it's going to take a little bit. You might think that you need to add more buttermilk, but you don't want to. With our quick breads, we want to follow the recipe exactly. If you don't, you could end up with something that's not going to turn out right, and the ingredients are there listed as they should be. It's just going to take a little bit of mixing. So fold, press, quarter turn, and you can see it's starting to come together. Just going to take a little bit more. Adding more buttermilk would just throw off the recipe. It wouldn't make them better, even though it might make it easier to get it to come together as one piece. Almost there, just a few more times. Fold, press, quarter turn. Fold, press, quarter turn. So now it's pretty much solid. Not very many crumbs. I don't want to do it too much because then I'm making more gluten, but I do want to do it just so it's coming together, and it should be kind of rough and bumpy still, just one solid piece. So then I can roll out my biscuits. So I'm going to take my rolling pin, and again, you want to flour this up too. So I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of flour. You could sprinkle a little over your dough. It's pretty dry though, so you probably wouldn't have to, but if yours is a little wetter, you can. And then I'm going to roll this out to about 1/2 inch. You could roll it out more than that. Your biscuits will just be thinner. Or you can roll it out less than that. They'll just be thicker. It just depends on what kind of biscuits you like. You can get more biscuits out of a thinner dough, but they just won't be as tall. So I have this rolled out to about the thickness that I want, and then I could take whichever size biscuit cutter I want. You want to use the same size for all of them though, otherwise they're going to cook at different speeds, and then you'll end up with some that are dry and some that are doughy. So I'm going to use the medium sized one, and again, you'll want to flour that up. So I like to take it, put a little flour on my cutting board, and then just kind of rub my biscuit cutter in it. With biscuits, you want to get as many out of the first round of rolling that you can, and I'm going to put it on a cookie sheet lined with parchment paper. The more you get out of it, the better consistency those biscuits are going to be, because the more times you have to knead it together and roll it out, and knead it together and roll it out, the more gluten's forming. So it's more important to get more out of it than it is to have a perfect shaped biscuit. So there's a few. You might not be able to see it on the screen, but there's a few with a little bit of a divot in them because I'm trying to get as much out of it as I can. With biscuits, when you put them on the cutting board, they can be really close together. They're not gonna grow out like your cookies did. They grow up, not out. So they can be really close. It doesn't really matter. And you don't have to like grease up your parchment paper because there's a lot of flour and grease in the biscuits already. And so they're not going to stick very easily, especially if you're using parchment paper. Parchment prevents it from sticking. So now that I've gotten as many out of that first go around as I can, I'm gonna take these pieces, and you don't wanna waste them. So you're just gonna take it and knead it a couple times so it comes back together. Then again, roll it back out. You wanna make sure it's rolled out to about the same consistency or the same thickness. Might have to flour it up again. And then I'm gonna try and get as many out of this second round as I can. When you get to the very end, that last little bit, you may have to shape by hand, because there might not be enough to like make into an actual biscuit shape. So my last little bit, this is gonna be the worst consistency one because it's gonna have the most gluten developed in it. I'll flatten that out. It's not perfect, but it'll work. So then these are gonna go into the oven and bake for about 10 to 15 minutes or until golden brown. You'll be able to tell that they're done by the bottoms. They'll start to get golden at that bottom edge. And we'll show you what these look like when they come out of the oven. So our biscuits came out of the oven, and as you can see, they're a little bit golden brown. They could have maybe gone a little bit longer if you like them more golden, but they'll be pretty light in general. Typically the bottoms start to get a little bit colored, and that's when you know they're done. So I hope you enjoy.